Ô, Martim.
Olá, olha, já deixei a...
So good afternoon, everybody. We've been chatting a little bit before the start, but now that probably most of you are here, we can start with today's policy event. It is focusing on the policy paper that European Meeting of Independent Education made together and was signed by numerous organizations of independent education in Europe earlier this year. And I'm very glad that we have these distinguished speakers today with us. And without further ado, I would continue or give the first word to Annalisa Canonni. She is a policy officer at DG EAC of European Commission.
Yeah, thank you, Daria, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm really very happy to be here and thrilled and grateful to the European Council for Steiner Waldorf Education for organizing this event on an initiative, on a Commission initiative, which is very dear to us and very important. And so I'm here today representing the European Commission and in particular DG Education and Culture. On behalf of my head of unit, Michael Teutsch, who could not be there today, I would really like to wish you a very fruitful discussion. And I'm here today in a listening mode and really to listen to your comments and input and interact with you. So Pathway to School Success, what it is. I think we can move to the next slide. Well, it's one of the key initiatives under the European education area to promote and strengthen the inclusive dimension of education. If we would like to summarize in a nutshell, really its objective, we can say that Pathway to School Success, as the name suggests, would like to promote better educational outcomes for all young Europeans, irrespective of their personal circumstances, family situation, socioeconomic or cultural background. And as an initiative, it's really firmly rooted in an inclusive, systemic and holistic vision of education, in which educational outcomes, educational success is not just intended in terms of measurable achievements and attainments. We really aim to have this broad vision about, the role of education as helping each person to reach his or her full potential, taking really into account all dimensions which may be relevant for children and young people in their educational trajectories. Pathways would like to address a number of educational challenges, some of which are well known. They've been around for quite some time, and there has been already a lot of work done around it. Some are new or relatively new. And of course, when I'm talking about all challenges, I'm mainly referring to the big issue of underachievement in basic skills and early leaving from education and training. These are two big areas in which for which European targets have been set, and around which quite some work has been done at European national level. And yet, despite all of this work, despite some progress, at least when it comes to early school leaving, and sustained efforts from the member states, at least from certain member states in particular, the situation continues to be problematic. And we know that early leaving from education and training is far from being eradicated, that we still have 9.9% of young people in the EU who can be considered early school leavers, meaning 3.2 million young Europeans, 18 to 24-year-old. And only 84.3% have completed upper secondary education. And we also know that there are big differences across and within countries, and that certain groups are more affected than others. Then basic skills, achievement in basic skills, that is also another problematic area. We know from the latest PISA round, it was already in 2018, but I mean, the previous cycles were also showing very similar patterns. We know that the situation is not very rejoicing, and even over the years we can really see a deteriorating trend in basic skills at European level. As PISA 2018 show, today 1 in 5 15-year-old Europeans are underachievers, meaning that they cannot perform basic tasks when it comes to reading, maths and science. There again, we have some countries which have managed to improve their performance, but the situation is quite uneven. And there again, like for early school leavers, we see that there are certain factors, and in particular socio-economic background, which may strongly affect pupils' performance and academic expectations. And we also know that the proportion of underachievers is much higher among pupils with a migrant background compared to pupils to pupils without a migrant background. Now, these challenges, as I said, they're well known. They've been around for some time, and now new challenges have emerged in time. We know that we have a problem in schools in terms of learning climate and well-being. That was again revealed by the results of PISA 2018, showing that the pupil's sense of belonging at school is declining, and bullying is widespread. And abundant research has really shown that violence in school, bullying, a poor learning climate, all of these can have really very negative consequences on the learner's health, of course, his personal development, but also on his or her academic achievements, and may increase the risk of leaving education prematurely. So this is a big new challenge, which was certainly known in the past, but around which there hasn't been not enough work, at least at European level. And then, of course, on top of everything, the COVID pandemic came, and the COVID crisis has made all of these challenges even more urgent, as we know, its consequences have certainly hit the most vulnerable learners, those who were struggling before the pandemic the hardest. For the moment, it's really difficult to measure exactly, to quantify exactly the impact of COVID in terms of learning achievements, and probably also in terms of numbers of school leavers, and we'll have to wait to for the next PISA round. But yet there are signals, very strong signals, that the most vulnerable learners were suffering a lot. And we also know from research carried out around the pandemic that problems linked to mental health, depression, anxiety, and generally speaking, well-being at schools have well-being difficulties have increased. And now, of course, with the war in Ukraine and the new migration flows, new challenges appear. Now, pathways, of course, the initial idea came before the war in Ukraine. It came before the COVID crisis. But of course, we need to adjust also to the context. So in a way, I would say pathways is about all of these. The main focus is, of course, about ensuring educational outcomes. So addressing educational achievements and educational attainments, but fully encompassing the dimension of well-being at school. We can move to the next slide. But when we started to think about pathways more than 2 years ago, of course, we were not starting from scratch. As I said before, there have been targets at European level around for more than 10 years. There has been work done at European level, at national level. So we are basically building on this experience, on this work, and in particular on the implementation of the Council recommendation adopted in 2011 on policies to reduce early school leaving. There were many good results, interesting results, following the implementation of this text, as it was shown by an assessment, an independent assessment, which was carried out in 2019, but there are still work to be done. So we basically started our reflection on that basis, and also I think that this slide also give an example of the different tools that were put in place at the time to implement the 2011 country recommendation. And basically for Pathway to School Success, we would like to follow the same approach. There will be a new country recommendation, which will replace and repeal the 2011 text, but the recommendation in itself, it's not the only tool, and it will be accompanied by other actions, including peer learning and exchanges of information between member states, collection of good practices that will be shared at European levels through the European Toolkit for Schools, which already exist, and which will be further expanded, for example, to include a dedicated session on well-being. Then, of course, there will be investment in research, and we will encourage countries to make full use of EU funds, and in particular the European Social Funds, the Recovery and the Resilience Facility, and Erasmus+.
Thank you, Annalisa. We do come close to the end, but
exactly. Okay, so just last final slide to tell you where we are a bit in terms of timing. So as I said, we started more or less with our reflection 2 years ago. Last year, between May and September, we had a round of extensive consultations through workshops with stakeholders, member states, practitioners, and experts. And we organized also an open public consultation. On that basis, we started the drafting process. And now I think that I can announce that the Commission proposal for a country recommendation will be adopted in the first half of June. Then the text will go to the Council for negotiation and adoption, hopefully in November at the European Council for Education in November. So I'm stopping here and the rest will come for the discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Annalisa. This was very interesting, and I'm sorry to but we do have a busy schedule and a lot of speakers today. Following your contribution, I would like to give the word to Rodrigo Queiroz and Melo from ECNAIS, European Council for Independent Education or Schools, who can tell us more about the background and the status of independent schools right now.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. Hello, Annalisa. Thank you very much everybody for being present today. Well, and I have to be truthful, I completely changed what I was bringing today, and you will find out why. And so just briefly, what I was supposed to give you a configuration of what's going on around in Europe regarding independent education. I would like to begin by stressing that for us at ECNAIS, offering independent education is not about cognitive values. It's not about 21st century skills. It's not about more or less efficiency in the delivery of educational services. It's all about personal development, freedom, and civic participation. So our benchmarks, our aims are well-being, our aims are the whole child and all the development of all its dimensions, and not so much the specifically academic outcomes of education. And we say this because for us, the possibility of civil society to offer education, not controlled or run by the state, is a cornerstone of democracy and freedom. For us, and following, well, just getting an example from the other side of the Atlantic, the child is not a mere creature of the state. Upbringing of children is a right and a duty of the parents. And so the possibility to choose different educational paths, and especially different worldviews and different approaches to what it means to be a human being in this world, what it means to live in society, is very, very, very important. And I would like to share with you two stories from our members, two stories that coincidentally but sadly were shared in the ECNAIS meeting in Kiev in 2018. The first is about M, a man from the Czech Republic who is an English teacher. And he was, when he was young, he was enlisted by force to serve in a foreign army. He lived and worked where the government decided he should live and work. And when the wall fell, he founded an independent school because he thought this was the way to teach students that in the future they were free to live as they found best and not to live according to what a government said in each moment. And the second story I would like to share with you is from O, a lady whose family was killed before her eyes by the Soviet army. She became a teacher and she lived and worked again where the government decided, a foreign government in this case, she should live and work. Upon liberation, she too founded an independent school because again, she said, I was educated by the state school to not think, just obey. Founding a school and teaching children to think for themselves, to be fair and free was a moral imperative. And I believe it is the only way to keep my country free. And so for us, independent education is not mostly about the traditional aims of education in Europe. It's a foundation of Europe itself. It's a pillar of democracy and freedom. Still, and again, what do we look like in Europe? Independent education is a minority, but it's a very big minority. Over 20 million students are students in an independent school, be it with an independent school where they have to pay tuition or an independent school that the cost is covered by state funds. Around 50% of these students receive some kind of support. In some states, it's very big, the support. In other states, it's very low, even though all of them are in compulsory education. In most states, thinking always about Europe, the independent school sector is leading innovation. And so the second message we would like to give is all public agencies all over Europe at the state level, at the European level, should take into consideration that there is a very big minority that should be heard and has to be heard fundamentally because of its importance for our way of living. And so this is what we see as the role of independent education and the contribution it could give in the construction of the European education area. We are, by definition, a value-based approach to education. Diversity is our core value, and this diversity is what then brings mutual recognition. Mutual recognition and is not that everybody is the same. It's not the same as homogeneity. It's about discovering the diversity there is in other and being able to create value through this diversity. Innovation is our trademark in most of the member states. And I would like to end citing Charles Glenn, that the arrangements of the provision of schooling tell us a lot about the country, how the country perceives the role of the state and society. And this brings us to what was voted in the European Parliament in 2019 on the modernization of the European school system, on the recognition that financing for independent education according to parents' wishes was a must for the European countries. Thank you very much. You have to turn your sound on, Dora.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Rodrigo. There was a lot of strong things said right now, and thank you for this approach. I would like to give the floor next to Ignasi Grau, who comes from OIDEL and can tell us more about the legal framework within independent schools have to work.
Thank you, Dora, for giving me the floor. Let's see if I can share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Perfect. So, well, thank you, all of you, for being here, all the ones who are following us now and all the ones who are going to see this video later, because as we informed many people, we are going to upload that later in YouTube. As you know, we have presented this position paper on the approach, a plural approach of the pathways for school success in Europe. And my task here, which is not an easy one, is in 5 minutes, explain the international instruments that enable educational pluralism in Europe. So first thing we have to take into consideration is like we are part of something bigger, which is the international system. And there are some human rights instruments that we have to take into consideration. The first thing is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. From a plural perspective, we have to be aware of 2 parts. First, that education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality. That doesn't mean like we want children to be super charismatic, but that they develop their persona. They understand who they are as pupil, as person, not only as individuals, but also as part of a community, part of family. And in a plural world, that implies many different, it implies different sorts of education, as the human being is unique, but also it's different depending on the social environment where he is. But we also cannot forget from a plural perspective that education shall promote understanding and tolerance. The second important part of the Human Rights Declaration is that parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. This part of the declaration that was written in the 40s later has had a translation in the international treaties, and we can see the same thing. In one side, we can see that education, the first aim of education is the full development of the human personality, and secondly, that states have to respect the liberty of parents to choose education, to choose schools other than those established by public authorities. And an interesting part is that they also recognize the liberty of individuals and bodies to establish and direct educational institutions. I mean, if we give the parents the chance to choose, but there are no things to choose, this freedom is sort of empty. The other important translation is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which also recognizes the liberty of parents and links this liberty with freedom of religion, freedom of thought, and freedom of conscience. So liberty of parents is not just an essential part of the right to education, but also an important pillar for the realization of many other human rights. This is the last universal document talking about educational pluralism, I think, which is the Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversity, which says all persons should be entitled to quality education and training that fully respect their cultural identity. And in a world that is becoming increasingly plural with many identities, it requires also a variety of a variety of schools, and also the right of parents to choose the education they want for their children. Let's move quickly to Europe. In Europe, also from a human rights perspective, when we talk about the right to education, an essential part of the right to education is the freedom to found educational establishments and the right of parents to ensure the education and teaching of their children. A relevant thing on that is that many times we understand this freedom. First, we don't understand it as an essential part of the right to education. And secondly, we don't see that it implies also positive obligations for the state. And what is relevant here is the resolution that Rodrigo was mentioning, the European Parliament resolution on the modernization of education in the European Union, that was approved in 2018, which says, with regard to increasing inclusiveness and ensuring freedom of educational choice, the provision of adequate financial support for schools of all categories and levels, both the state schools and non-for-profit private schools. So to ensure that educational pluralism is a liberty that all citizens could enjoy, not only those who have enough income to make these sort of choices. And finally, I think it would be interesting also to to see the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights. I'm not going to go through all of that because I'm just having another 20 seconds.
Yes.
But I think it's important to remember these two sentences of the sentence Folgero versus Norway that says that freedom of education is an essential part of the right to education, no matter if public or private. And second, that freedom of education safeguard of educational pluralism is essential in democratic societies. So it's also relevant to see like how educational pluralism is a pillar, a cornerstone of our democratic societies. I'm not taking any more of your time. Thank you all for hearing me, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much, Ignasi. This was a very, very thorough, but in a very short time, presentation of all the world and some of the European framework. Thank you for this. I am very happy to give the next word to Georg Jürgens, who comes from European Council of Steiner Waldorf Education, who will give a presentation of the position paper on pathways to school success that in a way brings together what we heard earlier from Ms. Canonni and what we heard from Rodrigo and Ignasi after them.
Thank you very much, Dora. Remind me, please, of the time I have for this now.
Yes.
Do I remember correctly that we have 10 minutes?
Yes, and if you can do it in less time, of course, that will be nice.
So indeed, I have now the task to present the position paper. And in a way, I have the feeling that my job is a little easier now, listening to all the speakers who spoke before, because they already mentioned many points that are also coming up in the paper. This presentation essentially puts all the content of the paper in the slides and marks some essential points, but I would nonetheless like to ask Dora or Ignasi to also put it in the chat so that everyone who wants to download it can do so. Of course, we chose a context for our meeting today, and this is what Annalisa presented earlier, the Pathways to School Success initiative of the European Commission. We just heard that the Commission will present its draft for a Council recommendation in the second quarter, so in June. And here we can see again the initial intentions that were put out there, helping pupils reaching a certain level of basic skills, reducing early school leaving, and encouraging pupils also to complete upper secondary education. But Annalisa also mentioned another few important points like well-being, looking into the impact of COVID on school systems, and of course the recent developments around the Ukrainian war and the challenges connected around that for the school systems. Our paper tries to make a contribution to this debate, showing what from a perspective of the independent school sector can be considered some essential factors of school success, and might therefore also be of interest for your work, Annalisa, when you take when you're drafting this recommendation on pathways to school success. And we want to showcase here in this paper the importance of the independent schools in European education systems by presenting 5 pillars. Before we do that, I would like to read an important point from the preamble of the paper that states that neither the state nor civil society are able to succeed alone. Pluralistic school systems based on the principle of subsidiarity are the way forward. All schools must be accessible to students who want to enroll in a context of freedom of choice. So here we can see that key factors are diversity and accessibility of different forms of education. And the whole paper was written in this spirit. The first pillar comments on education as a common good. And here we want to broaden this picture that education is something that involves, on the one hand, the state-run schools, and on the other hand, the children who receive education, and stress the importance of all the other stakeholders, teachers, parents, communities, but of course, also very importantly, the independent schools that often bring their own pedagogical approach to the table and can therefore offer a great deal of diversity in school systems. Then the second pillar of the paper here refers to independent schools being an essential part of the educational ecosystem. Here we can remember the graph that Rodrigo showed earlier, with these 18.7% of students being enrolled in independent schools. Of course, there are great differences across Europe with regards to how many students are enrolled. We also heard about school funding and the European Parliament resolution. We would like to stress the importance of funding in relation to freedom in education. Only if funding for independent schools is available, this diversity that we would like to see across Europe and that we believe learners would greatly benefit from, this can only be implemented for all families, not just for the wealthy, if school funding is available for all schools. Then the third pillar refers to the parents as the cornerstone of the realization of the children's rights. Here we have the Convention of the Rights of the Child listed, with parents as having the primary responsibility for the upbringing of their child. And then the Charter of Fundamental Rights that focuses more on the right of parents to ensure the teaching and education of their children. And here, very important, the religious, philosophical, and pedagogical convictions related to that essentially open up the possibility to offer different pedagogical approaches. Also important is that in the light of COVID, parents were relied on heavily by the state. And we believe that this recognition of the important role of the parents should continue after the pandemic. Then the fourth pillar, the diversity and quality education as fundamentals of democracy. We believe that is really essential, because manifold challenges of school systems cannot be solved with a one-size-fits-all approach. They require different ways of learning for different students, and they require that parents can make judgments on where and how their children learn and develop best. For that, we need diversity. And of course, here, political culture and legal frameworks play a role, because they can either facilitate or they can hinder this endeavor. So we think the independent school sector is an enabler of diversity and should be valued for this contribution. Fifth, and that refers to the dimension of well-being that comes out very strongly in the initiative on pathways to school success. We think that school policies should indeed help promote individual well-being at school, and they should be supported by a healthy school climate. There are many ways of doing that, but now speaking for an organization representing Waldorf schools, we believe that a salutogenic approach to learning that stresses the sense of coherence in learning may be the way to go forward. What is important for that is making all learning comprehensible giving learners the feeling that they can manage the tasks and challenges they are dealing with, that they are able to do what is asked of them, and that whatever they are asked to do in schools also is a meaningful activity for them. By doing that, a sense of coherence occurs, and we think that is very important for well-being at school and for success at school. I will close after presenting those 5 pillars by also showing the diversity behind this paper. There are quite many different organizations representing independent schools, and who goes through the list will also see that these schools really stand for different approaches and backgrounds. Thank you very much. And we are open for questions, and we can be reached through these email addresses.
Thank you very much, Georg. To my opinion, this was a very nice summary or compression of all the work that we've put on our end, but also nice connection to what we've heard about the Pathways to School Success initiative of the Commission. It is again my pleasure to open or start the second panel, and that's the panel where we hear from more stakeholders and precisely in different roles that they are presenting in the school systems in Europe. First, I would like to welcome Arja Krauchenberg. She is coming from European Parents Association and will tell us a little bit about how, from the parents' perspective, all of this sounds.
Well, thank you very much, Dora, for this introduction. For those of you who do not know the European Parents Association, we are an umbrella association representing about 35 parents associations or federations of parents associations in 24 countries in Europe, not only within the European Union, but also without, Serbia, for example. This is also something that I found very interesting in your position paper, because on the one hand, you refer to the European Commission's paper on the pathways to school success. On the other hand, you talk a lot about Europe and European pupils. So I think we need to be very careful by what we mean when we say what. Because if we count students, then I'm not so sure that we are okay when we say Europe and the count that you have made in the paper, Rodrigo. I think that refers to the European Union and not really to Europe. But apart from that, I would like to share a few thoughts with you on some basic concepts that are behind the title of this event. It has already been mentioned by the representative of the Commission what they want to say when they say schools and pathways, but I would like to insist on the question, what are we talking about when we say school? We all have an idea that comes to our mind when somebody mentions the word school, right? But is that idea the same for all of us? I really doubt that, because according to our different experiences, national, cultural contexts, educational traditions, and so on, school might or might not include early childhood, for example. As a matter of fact, in some countries, school starts at the age of 3 or 4. In France, it's even called école maternelle, whereas in other countries, we speak of kindergarten. In those countries, school refers to children from the age of 6 or even 7 years of age. In other countries, vocational education and training is considered part of school. In others, rather part of the world of work. So there's a big variety of what we mean when we say school. That also has an influence on what we mean by school success. In general, people would probably say school success means getting good marks or grades in a given system. But how would we then define school success in the école maternelle or in preschool? Also, in the vocational sector, the situation is not so evident, as here we are dealing with a lot of work-based learning, collaborative project work in companies and other forms of outcomes. And I think it was mentioned before that we actually mean educational outcome, yeah? But that is far more than school success. So when we look at these examples and the lessons that we may have learned during the pandemic, namely that the attitudes we need most in order to get through times of crises and to cope with adversity, like the horrible war inflicted on Ukraine by the Russian government now. These attitudes are flexibility, the capability to adapt to new situations and to do so quickly, resilience, cooperation and teamwork, creativity, including problem solving and adopting new perspectives, self-regulation of emotions. I think one of the reasons why we are in this situation now is because somebody has not been able to self-regulate very well here. A clear vision of one's own capabilities and those of others and how to make the most of them. Empathy, and maybe most important of all, curiosity and the willingness to learn and explore. Please do remember especially these last two. I'll get back to them in a minute. So they should lead us to reconsider this idea of the school success as the obtention of good grades, on top of it in each and every subject in some countries. When we have a brief look at history and understand where this concept actually comes from, as an Austrian, I'm rather well placed to do so, as the current system goes mainly back to two people, Frederick the Great, King of Prussia, and his most fervent adversary, Maria Theresa, ruler over the Habsburg lands after the death of her father. Frederick wanted a strong and effective army to conquer other territories, and he understood that educated soldiers who know how to read and write can understand and follow orders better than those who don't. So he started to establish compulsory schooling for boys, and his military successes proved his point. Maria Theresa, who personally wrote the lesson plans for all her 16 children, by the way, and supervised their education, came to understand that she would also need an education system not only to have good soldiers, but in order to obtain obedient subjects that would carry out all her reforms and ideas and serve her and the country. It took a while to establish such a system. 4 years of compulsory schooling for girls and boys from the age of 6 in the case of Austria, but it served the purpose and led to the establishment of the famous system of public officials, clerks, if you like, and the according bureaucracy that freed the Habsburgs from the dependency on the goodwill of the aristocracy. It served the purpose then. But if we get back to the attitudes that I mentioned before, remember the most important ones, curiosity and the interest to learn and explore, they're actually innate. Every baby is born curious and wants to explore the world. And they start doing so from the very beginning by listening to sounds actually before they're even born, then by watching, by putting everything into their mouth. All of you who are parents probably remember what is called the oral phase. Later by touching, imitating, and asking questions. You'll recall the famous why phase, followed by the why not. But why is it then that many children stop asking questions and lose their interest in learning when they have been in school for a different number of years? I think it's quite evident that this has to do with the way we do schooling. And if we take that into account, then the question should be, should not be how can we help every child to be successful at school, which is actually the idea behind these pathways, But it should rather be the other way around. How can we make educational system foster every child's needs and interest? The answer to this question is as simple as it is difficult to implement, at least for many of our current systems in Europe. We need a child-centered, holistic approach to teaching and learning. And we need to involve parents, families, and the surrounding community. Remember the old African saying that it takes a village to raise a child? Parents are the primary educators of their children, not only chronologically the first, but also the most impacting, in a positive or even in a negative way. So they need support because nobody falls from heaven as a born parent. But even though parenting is one of the most difficult tasks in the world, we're talking about the next generation of human beings, the future of mankind, really, right? Nobody gives you any training for that. And not all the well-meant advices from relatives are truly helpful. So when we're talking about pathways, The first pathway should be to establish a solid support system for parents, starting from the moment a woman is pregnant. These 9 months can actually be used well for preparation of both parents, for the joys, but also the challenges that lay ahead. When the child is born, the support needs to continue, a midwife accompanying the young family, helping with the first bath, feeding techniques, changing tips and tricks, and so on, but also explaining the next steps in the development of the child that are to be expected and how to best handle them. Gradually, there can be other home visiting services, parent-child centers, where parents get advice. Exchange with peers, getting together with other young families, play groups with professional leadership from early childhood experts. Adequate parental leave schemes are necessary to give parents a choice of when they would like to start sending their children to an early childhood education setting, for how often and how long during each day. Yes, I'm almost finished.
Thank you.
Institutions providing good quality education and care with adequately trained professionals in sufficient numbers that are accessible and available to all are further factors that lead to positive educational outcomes. And the acquisition of these attitudes and the competences mentioned before, that is the important thing. Parents want their children to develop and use their full and unique potential, to become independent, happy, and responsible adults. They're willing and able to support them on this pathway, but favorable conditions and supportive surrounding would be more than welcome. Because remember, many, many great people, starting from Einstein to Winston Churchill and others, they did badly at school, but they still made their way in life. Thank you.
Thank you, Arja, very much. It is a very ungrateful position I'm in to try to interrupt such great contributions. So without further ado, I would like to give the word to Markku Moisala, who is a member of ECNAIS, but he will be speaking to us on the behalf of schools. So please, Markku, floor is yours.
Thank you, Dora, and thank you, Arja, for your questions and ideas. It's very nice to listen to those. So I'm a principal in a school in Finland, and it was very interesting to reflect the school I'm running in Finland towards these 5 pillars that were stated in this position paper. My slide is only one. I want to show it to you because it contains the pillars I want to show you, and then try to explain some of that. We in Finland, we try to fill the requirements to represent the Nordic ideal of a welfare state. As a whole, of course, this is a very good goal to strive for. The implementation of the welfare state focuses on services maintained by the public authorities, and that can be seen quite well in all Nordic countries. But this alone, we know, is not enough. To fill the need of versatile services and fill in the gaps of the web network, a sector of private enterprises is essential. But we still have a locus for the sector that is placed between the public and the private. And here come the Finnish independent schools. These institutions, they are run by associations, foundations, churches, etc. And they form a group that doesn't work for profit. That's one main thing in Finnish independent schools. Being the mainstream in Finland, the public schools outnumber well the independent schools, in which only 2% of pupils of Finnish compulsory basic education are studying. When we go to the upper secondary level, then the percentage is about 10, but really 2% of the basic education. As the Finnish school system is internationally renowned through many studies, the effort of independent schools is in this very uniform Finnish system is easily hidden. When people ask from abroad, sometimes the Finnish educational authorities deny Finland having private schools because the funding comes primarily from the state. At present, the funding for all non-public schools is cut by 6% since 2015, purely from political reasons. For a school like the one I'm running, this cuts annually a great deal, nearly €500,000 from pupils whose parents are paying taxes to cover, for example, costs of education. These parents don't get the full benefit for their children who are studying in independent school. These children anyway don't suffer any lack of proper education thanks to good economics of independent schools. Our service is produced clearly with less money than the public one. But the missing funding affects the investments in the school instead. Originally, starting 150 years ago, one could say that the Finnish secondary education has been built by private schools. But the biggest school reform so far in 1970s cut the number of private schools to minimum when the responsibility of basic education was moved to public municipalities. And nowadays, to found a new independent school in Finland is a really difficult task. The reputation and different educational emphasis of independent schools make them a very tempting, you could say interesting choice for the parents, regardless their background, educational level or income. As Finnish independent schools, we don't collect any fees. On the other hand, we know that for some parents whose child has been shown a place in an independent school, it becomes a surprise hearing the background of the school. But it's a positive background, as they say. Well-organized, positive atmosphere, good prerequisites for learning, healthy buildings. These are some of the adjectives often heard from parents when talking about independent school. Education is still a very highly valued asset in Finland. Teachers enjoy respect in the society, and parents rely on the good work that schools perform. This is something we don't want to lose. The world around us is in constant change, as we see. Well, it has always been. The children and parents have different ideas and expectations compared to previous ones as well. Diversity sprouts also from immigration, when we receive new families from different cultures. Well, from Ukraine nowadays, it's not so different culture, but anyway, a different place. Diversity needs to be met in a proper way, starting from the needs of the pupil, as Arja said there earlier. The independent schools offer here a non-political approach, more like a value-based approach. The change from purely teaching important subjects to a holistic approach to pupils' upbringing and education has been very visible in Finnish schools since 1970s. Promoting student welfare, positive atmosphere, involving teachers, pupils and parents together to develop school to a safe, secure environment have been well-chosen tools to meet the challenges of today. I'm very happy for that. At present, Finland is facing a reform of public health and social services. This includes, for example, moving all these services under a new large provincial administration. Here again, the independent schools rise up with new ideas. We are showing our own model by organizing the student welfare services on the spot at school where the pupils are. Thank you. This is all.
Thank you, Markku. It was good to get some national perspective in this in this conversation. You are still sharing your screen.
Yep.
And I am not sure if Rades, Voicu or Voicu wants to share his screen, but
he does not.
Okay. Hello, welcome.
Hi.
It is now your moment. We had to excuse Martin Rosen, who was supposed to speak on behalf of teachers, and luckily we had enough to say all up until now. So I'm very happy to give the floor to you, Rades. You will be speaking, of course, on the behalf of students.
Yes, thank you so much for giving me the floor, and thank you so much once again for the invitation. My name is Voicu. I'm 19 years old. I'm a board member of OBESSU, the Organizing Bureau of European School Student Unions. And it was very, very interesting and very inspiring to hear all of the presentation given earlier. I am a member of on behalf of the LLLP, I'm a member of the Commission subgroup on Pathways to School Success. So we do stay in touch on this and do quite a fair share of work on the topic. But today I'm not here to talk as a member of the subgroup on the topic, but to present the learner's view. And besides my experience as a board member of OBESSU and besides the work that we do at European level, working with school students, I've also worked at a national level in Romania with school students' rights, with educational policy in general, and at a local level as well. And what we've noticed during the pandemic, because we cannot, of course, even though we're slowly sliding out of it, hopefully, we cannot ignore the huge impact that it has had on all policies at EU level, and which it still has and will certainly have in the long term. I believe that very, very valuable things have been said in terms of assessing the needs that we have right now, in terms of assessing the ways in which these needs can be met. However, from our perspective and from what we've seen at the grassroots level, school performance or school success does not only mean reaching school performance. Sometimes school success or having schools that perform for students and for learners in general means having schools in disadvantaged communities, for example, who can just retain their learners and who can just make sure that these learners finally reach their graduation day and actually come out with a set of skills as basic as they might be, but that they are in school up until the end of their studies. These are the struggles some schools are faced with. So I think in this context, I wouldn't say it's hypocritical, but it's quite a lot to ask them to have extraordinary performances at European standards or anything of the sort. So I think, first of all, when we talk about pathways to school success and school success in general, it's very important to calibrate our expectations to the local context and to make sure that everything that we do in our policies at European level are very much so connected to the local context. And indeed, I've heard some very, very valuable contributions from Ms. Canonni on the topic of bullying and the impact it has on pathways to school success, on school success in general, both during the pandemic, but especially in normal times, because bullying is not a new issue, nor bullying, nor cyberbullying. So this is a major topic that we've been tackling in the past few years, unfortunately without much success. We see that bullying rates, regardless of all the local initiatives or the policy initiatives, bullying rates stay at an alarmingly high rate. And this has an impact on the well-being of school students, which we know from all the studies and research that organizations and the EU has been doing has a direct impact on the school success of learners. So well-being in schools is not just a cool, flashy thing or something that students want. It's actually incremental for the school success of learners. Another important topic to tackle is early school leaving. And I'm afraid that we do, unfortunately, have data on the topic. And I'm saying unfortunately, not because it's not good to have data on topics such as these, but because the data that we have both at the macro level, so at the UN level, from bouncing through the pandemic, and at a sort of more micro level, at a national level, from agencies, from ministries, is not alarming. It's truly devastating. At the UN level, we've seen that initial data from the UN when we first bumped into the pandemic showed us that over 1 billion students worldwide left schools. At this point, we don't know how many of these students have actually returned into schools, how many of them have been reintegrated, if they have been reintegrated, to what extent, how, and what are the practices that educational systems have used to integrate them back into schools. At a European level, even though the reporting might not have been done, because we all know that ministries and agencies have had a lot on their plates lately, even if the reporting hasn't been done, the numbers at the national level are devastating. So we are, as we will see in a couple next months and years, we will see a huge decrease in the numbers of learners which are currently enrolled in formal education. And right now, when developing, because this is a huge opportunity, and when developing this initiative of Pathways to School Success, we have to think of support mechanisms for learners, and most importantly, of ways in which we can bring learners in sort of a second chance type of program, in which we can bring learners back into schools. Of course, this dual approach of, first of all, providing learners with support measures they need to stay in school and to perform in school where that is possible. And the second approach of bringing learners back into schools is not going to be easy. I think that we all know that, and that's why we gather in such meetings to try to find the best solutions that we can for this dual policy approach to be done as effective and as quickly as possible. But we do believe at OBESSU that it is the duty of the Commission to come up with such a roadmap, and we are here to support. And I think I speak on behalf of all of us when we said that we are here to support such initiatives, and we are here to provide inputs both from a grassroots level and from our point of view as stakeholders, to provide such inputs in order to make this dual approach possible. Because at the end of the day, without support measures, and yes, even financial support measures for children from disadvantaged backgrounds to be able to stay in school, and for learners from, let's say, higher up backgrounds to be able to perform, we're afraid such an initiative won't really have the impact that we all wish for. So this is the perspective that we have at the moment, and of course we will be staying close to the Commission to support in any way possible. I hope I didn't take up too much of your time, because I know we're a bit late with the schedule.
We are actually okay now with the time. Thank you very much, Darius. You managed to speak very quickly, and but it is very good because you did say a lot of important things. For the end of the second panel, we have Brikena here with us, who is leading the lifelong learning platform, and she will be here with us to speak on the behalf of civil society associations, organizations that certainly play a big role in here. And Brikena, the floor is yours. Oh, you're muted, Brikena.
What about now?
Yes, it's good.
Okay. Okay, so good afternoon to everyone. I hope you can hear me. Thank you for having me on behalf of the Lifelong Learning Platform, which, as you mostly know, it's quite a diverse group of organizations representing education training stakeholders and civil society networks. So I would like to bring that perspective, looking also at the position paper that you shared, which I welcome and congratulate you for the work on it. I did the old way, just took the paper, looked into it, and highlighted a few points that I wanted to share with you, which I think are important. A lot has been said already, so I won't repeat myself, and I will be very short. Obviously, coming from the Lifelong Learning Platform, the perspective from a lifelong perspective would be my focus into this. But I wanted to first maybe start with what also Raresh highlighted, is the pressure that school system has gone through during the pandemic, but not only with digital revolution, if we can call it as such. And now with the green, we have a lot of pressure put into our school system, and we all expect the school system to respond to the challenges of the society. And I don't think it's the approach or is the right approach to go for. So I really think we should look at alternative ways. We should look at how school, at the whole school approach, like you said, and how school connects to the community and to other stakeholders, to other education and training systems, to fill those gaps in the society, if that's the needs. So I really think that's something that is costing us a lot and is costing the children and the pupils a lot, because if we continue to put such a pressure, we will have indeed a cost when it comes to well-being of children and of the society. You saw probably many studies during the pandemic that showed clearly the effect that the pressure had on children's well-being when it comes to online learning, but not only, and also curricula is becoming more and more heavier, and that is also something that is affecting students' retainment into schools and their well-being in general. So I think that's something that we should keep in mind, and you rightly address the well-being into your policy document. Another thing, while of course being aware that not putting too much pressure, at the same time we need to recognize that is a key component of the education system. The school system is the first system, public system in most of the countries where children indeed start learning and they start developing their curiosity, like Arja mentioned. And I think it's key for lifelong learning. Those first years of one's life are very important to build that curiosity throughout life to continue learning. And I think if we destroy that curiosity at very early ages, and then if we don't encourage children to learn throughout life and to develop that curiosity, we might miss later on in life as well. You also rightly mentioned the issue of funding, and I think it's a key issue here. And you probably know very well the position of LLLP. At the moment, this year, we are focusing on investment in education at a large, so not only school and formal education, but also non-formal and informal education. And we believe that public funding and common good is actually the approach to go. And we need funding to support all sorts of education for all type of learners and all needs that exist in the society. So we need to look at these broader needs. Another important element that you also raise is the role of the independent schools. And obviously they're a component of the system, of the school system. And I think in a democratic society, and that's also part of the vision and mission of the Lifelong Learning Platform, to support democratic education systems, it also means that independent schools have their place and have their role to play, and they should therefore be part of the system and be supported by the public investments as well. One thing that maybe I also noticed in your position paper, while I obviously fully agree with what Arja was mentioning about the role of parents, I think when looking at the parents, I would extend that to all type of educators that are surrounding a school community that play a role as well as a support to that parenting role. That maybe in your paper is not that much highlighted, but I do understand. I'm sure you support that idea. But I just wanted to mention that indeed we should extend that to educators, for the reason that also we expect a lot from parents too. So we're this is maybe a way to also reduce the burden on a particular group. Another point that in your position paper you highlight is the diversity and the quality as fundamental of democracies. And I think inclusion here indeed is at the heart of the point that you are trying to make. And I would highlight that when we talk of diversity and quality and democracy, what Raresh also mentioned, the role of and the voice of learners is key. We can't have that inclusion, we can't have diversity or quality education or democratic systems if learners are not given the right to speak and voice their concerns and have a say on the curricula, have a say on the way teaching and learning happens in school, outside school. So I think this is a key element that I would keep in mind when it comes to school success. It's learners really at the center of it, because it's the only way we can, let's say, achieve success. But another part, an element in this is also what I mentioned before is the community, so the other stakeholders and NGOs and civil society organizations. They play a key role. There are many, they have different and nice different approaches to learning that they can complete and can help schools to achieve their goals. And I think these links should be made more possible for independent schools, but also for the school system in general. And I think it's even more true when it comes to, for instance, the green transition, because the link to the nature, going into the nature, learning about the nature can be done through the help of civil society organizations as well, not only through books in the classroom. So I think it's very important that this experiential learning happens through the help of other stakeholders and other education and training providers. And the very last point that you make on the well-being, as I mentioned as well, I think for school success to be measured, we should move from the current system of how we assess and evaluate the school success, which is based on numbers, figures, and performance, like Raresh mentioned as well, but rather look at the well-being and satisfaction of its groups, so learners, staff, teachers, parents, and everyone that is involved in this community. So I think, and I will close with that, for us as Lifelong Learning Platform, schools need to slowly change, because if I say faster, that will be too much pressure. But in order for them to really be successful, we should look at what they bring to the society, humans that are well in their mental and physical condition. So I think it's very important that well-being stays at the heart of the success of schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brikena. This was maybe a perfect way to finish this second panel with the real emphasis on well-being. It's been a topic that Lifelong Learning Platform has been looking at all of the last year. And the new topic of investment in education is again one very important one. And I think everybody here gave its words, the words to it today. For the last part of this event, we have only 15 minutes left together. The time flew by very quickly. I'm very happy to welcome Victor Negrescu, who is an MEP and Vice Chair of CULT Committee of European Parliament. He managed to join us shortly for this last point. And I would at this point also like to excuse Mihaela Šojdrova, also an MEP and a Vice Chair of CULT Committee, who could unfortunately not be here with us today, but she was in the planning. Victor Negrescu, you are now the person to bring in the perspective of the CULT Committee, but also of your own, to the position paper and to what you have managed to hear up until now.
Thank you so much. First of all, congratulations for this event. I think it's very important to discuss, again, how we can build a successful pathway when it comes to school success. And of course, this is not easy to be defined. And of course, I looked at your position paper, and it contains very important constructive points that have been part of our work in the European Parliament. Indeed, there isn't a perfect pathway, and this is what we have to recognize. There are different pathways to achieving, let's say, success in education. In order to do so, I think one of the key points, as it has been underlined, of course, in your document, is to really consider education as being a common good, but also the access to quality education, really treat it as a right, as it is underlined, of course, in several national documents, but also at European level, in the Charter for Fundamental Rights. And if we really recognize this fact, of course, we have to understand that we have to make sure that we have to give access, but also have to define what we mean by quality education, identifies ways for people to achieve success through education, make education again attractive again for young people, because it lost some attractiveness in some parts of Europe, but also really redefine education. And if we want to redefine education, well-being is a key topic. And well-being means well-being for learners, but also for educators, but also for the communities in the same time. And we have to understand that, of course, education is not today anymore a bilateral relation only between the system of education and pupils or students. Education today is more than that. It's about the community, it's about the environment, it's about the learning space, it's about developing skills, but also about developing social skills, about developing creativity. It's about developing the understanding, again, of the society. It's about civic education. It's about a lot of things in the same time, which makes things more complicated, to be very frank, and more complicated to teach today, to educate today. So this is why it's very important as decision makers to listen to all relevant stakeholders in the field that have learned by doing what we can do in order to improve how education is working across the world, but also mainly here in Europe, and really build an ecosystem capable of adapting, evolving, listening, but also providing different solutions to learners, but also different ways of teaching to teachers. And of course, this means to develop a system that is flexible enough to adapt to all of that, which is not easy. Educational systems are at the core of our nations, national member states, and sometimes we tend to believe, decision makers in the field, that any change is being done against the system, which is false. The system can lead the change. But in order to do that, we need to build that ecosystem that is working. And that ecosystem can be and can function very well at local level, but can function very well at national level. But also, I'm an active promoter of this dimension, can work really well also at European level. But we have to work into doing that. So at European level, we are trying to build this type of ecosystem, especially with regards to digital education, where the European Union has shown that it can contribute in a positive way to this dimension. But I think we can identify different layers where we can do that. And in order, of course, to do that, we need to have this concept being really implemented across the system. It's a multi-stakeholder approach, where, like it has been said in the different interventions, and Radesh underlined this fact as well, where we give a real voice to non-governmental organizations, to parents, to educators, to learners, to local communities, local authorities as well, to private entities. So we really have to create this multi-stakeholder approach in an efficient way, in a system that really is working on daily basis in improving things. So this tailored approach, is a customized approach, is something that is really, in my opinion, expected and desired by many stakeholders in the field, but it's not easy to draft such a format. So I think one of the biggest tasks in the future, when it comes to our participation and our desire, I think, of everyone here involved in this conference to help education, is to learn how to design the system in order to make it flexible and make it customizable as much as possible. So this is not easy. No one has the perfect solution. There is no perfect pathway, but I think the dialogue is essential in order to do that. So of course, there are many elements that we need to learn how to introduce in education: non-formal education, education about creativity, civic education to a certain extent, giving the possibility for learners to choose their own path, while at the same time having a core system that works very well. So there are different recommendations. Some of them are addressed in your policy paper. Some have been addressed by the Parliament in the different resolutions or documents that we have approved. The Commission also did a good job in this regard. We have member states being at the forefront of such types of innovations. We need to convert those ideas, present them at European level, present the best examples, learn from what has been done, but also do more. And we have here, and this will be my last comment for today, a great opportunity. The great opportunity is offered by the Recovery and Resilience Facility. I have been the member of the European Parliament that initiated that recommendation, that was also actively supported by the civil society across Europe, to ask member states to allocate at least 10% for education and lifelong learning from the recovery plan. We only achieved the recommendation, but the Parliament supported that. But we also looked at the results, and the majority of member states decided to allocate at least 10% for education and lifelong learning, which is positive. But what we did not manage to do, and we need to do right now, because they are starting to implement the projects, is to have specific targets when it comes to the way that they are using those resources. when it comes to quality, when it comes to achievement, when it comes to well-being in education. We have to put them into being more transparent about that. And we also need to push them in converging their ideas. This is not only in relation to education, but specifically on education. We see many initiatives on education supported and financed through the recovery plan, but we don't see common initiatives, or we don't see synergies. So Italy is investing a lot in education. Romania, because we pressured a lot the government, the previous government, we convinced them, and we have more than 10% for education. France is doing some things on the digital aspect. Spain is doing as well. But yeah, each of them is doing separate things, which is good. But we should also try to push them in trying to do things together, or at least exchange ideas and solutions while using those resources and implementing them. So this will be, let's say, my call to you, my request to you, dear participants and activists for education, like I am myself, to try to, let's say, push for further convergence, better use of the recovery and resilience facility, defining well-being in education, and building this multi-stakeholder approach that will develop an efficient education ecosystem that can make education more flexible, customizable, of a better quality, and with better results across Europe. So you can count on my support, and now you can count, of course, on my desire to work with you on those aspects. And I'm certain that in this group of participants, but also beyond this group of participants, there are many people willing to contribute to that. Thank you so much again for the invitation, and congratulations for this initiative and this document.
Thank you very much, Victor. It is always a pleasure to have you with us at the events, and to finish and of course to hear everything you said. I think it's really important that it comes from you and that it is said in such a setting like it is right now with all of us here. I am extremely happy that we managed to stay in time, and that I am really glad to now come back to Annalisa Canonni, who is speaking on the behalf of the DG EAC of the Commission, who at the beginning introduced the initiative on pathways to school success, and now has very actively listened and also took some notes, as I could imagine, throughout this hour and a half of conversation. And I'm very, very interested to hear what you have to say up until all of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dora. And I would really like to thank all the panelists for your contribution. It was extremely interesting and inspiring. And indeed, I was taking notes. Of course, I cannot reply to the very many questions that came up, or questions or issues that were raised, but I can see that there are some commonalities and common trends, and a number of key topics coming up regularly, or at least various speakers took them, and I can only subscribe to those. I mean, when it comes to the need of embedding well-being, really focusing more on well-being in school, about the need for involving and cooperating with all stakeholders at all levels, especially those that are probably the most difficult to reach. When it comes about to listening to the voice of learners, I can only agree on that. I mean, I can fully agree and subscribe on all of your position. I would also like to come back on one remark which was made about the definition or the title of this initiative. It's a conversation that we had already with some of you also during the consultation phase. And I personally can also confess that I was not myself very happy with the title, but sometimes you just have to do with what you get. So shall we talk about school success, or shall we talk about education, well, successful education, because I have the impression that school success put the responsibility on the shoulders of the learners, whereas it takes a village to raise a child, and it takes a whole education systems to educate. So yes, indeed, maybe the title is not the most inspiring. It can lead to some misunderstanding, but I think in our minds, at least in the Commission, and this is what we are trying to convey, is that it's definitely beyond points beyond school marks, beyond achievement. Of course, I think that policymakers like to have data, they like to have clear, measurable targets. And indeed, I mean, we have this underachievement targets, we have this early school leaving target, which are also kind of important signals, like it's like an alarm beep. Okay, so I think it's important to stick to that, but through that, we try also to convey other messages and a more holistic and broader perspective, more inclusive perspective on education. So indeed, yeah, maybe it's not the best title, but through, I think I'm personally already quite happy to see that compared to 10 years ago, there is no more talking about education for employability. And I honestly, I really consider that as a success in itself, and that we start moving beyond these ideas and really trying to look at education as a process, as a relational process, and really we're aimed at growing as a person as a whole. Thank you so much for all your input and insight. They will certainly help our reflection, even though we are really at the very last moments in the process. But of course, the adoption of a council recommendation is not the end. I would say that it's a starting point for something which will continue. We have these working groups. There will be an expert group also reflecting more specifically on well-being and supportive learning environment in schools. And we want to continue this dialogue with you and stakeholders. So we have Rares in our working group. Martin, the other panelist who could not make it today, is also a member of our working group. And this is how we want to proceed really in the implementation, fostering dialogue and collaboration with all people that are really concerned about the good and the good development of pupils and all learners. So thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Annalisa. It is really nice to hear your finishing words, and I feel the atmosphere now between us to be very positive one of hope and even more desire to really achieve all of the things that we spoke about today. I wish us all much luck and strength and endurance in our further work. I wish to thank everybody who was here today, who gave their speeches and gave their points to the conversation. And of course, thank you for all the participants who were here, who were listening. We are all open for your questions on our email inboxes. But as you can see, there was so much to say, and just hoping that all that was said was really helpful to everybody as well. So good luck, everybody. We continue on working and see each other at another time on other meetings. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, and thank you very much, everyone.